The man who comes back through the door in the wall will never be quite the same as the man who went out. He will be wiser but less sure, happier but less self-satisfied, humbler in acknowledging his ignorance, yet better equipped to understand the relationship of words to things, of systematic reasoning to the unfathomable mystery which it tries forever vainly to comprehend. Aldous Huxley, writer, philosopher. Experience 4. Breeding Program, Money, Past Lives, and Multidimensional Selves. September 27th, 2021, 6 a.m. to 7:36 a.m. Over the past few days, I've been waking up abruptly throughout the night at various times. This morning, though, was when things were different. I woke up around 5:45 a.m. and laid there for about 15 minutes or so until I was able to fall back asleep. As soon as I did, I immediately heard a ringing in my right ear, which came in so loudly and at such high velocity that it felt as though it went through my head all the way from my right ear to my left ear and bounced back out of the right ear. Difficult to explain, but it was like a sudden high-pitched boomerang of sound, or someone tuning a transistor to a specific frequency, overshooting it and then dialing back. Once this happened, my astral body popped out of my physical body, where I found myself immediately floating feet first towards a wall. I quickly went through the wall and out into the street. While this was happening, I heard soft steps, as though I was being carried, but I felt like I was floating. I remember thinking, my ears are hearing footsteps in the bedroom, but I'm floating out here. It was a strange sensation to feel like I was floating while my ears were telling me I was being carried. I didn't quite understand that. Maybe I was weightless, but they still needed to physically guide me. My consciousness was essentially in two places at once, outside floating and inside my bedroom asleep. Whenever this happens, it is like having a microphone, my ears, in one room and monitoring the sound from a completely different room. Super weird. I arrived on a residential-looking street, not my neighborhood or any street that I recognized, where a black car, a sedan of some kind, I don't recall the make and model, was parked by the curb. I was tilted into a standing position by whoever was carrying me, and as soon as I stood upright, everything became extremely lucid, like I was suddenly awake. It was nighttime, and the pavement was wet, like it had just been raining. I stood outside the black car, and someone opened the back door on the left side. An alien-looking man stepped out of the car as if to usher me inside, but he made no gestures. I got into the car and shifted over to the middle seat, while he got back in and sat to my left. I was sandwiched in between him and an East Asian-looking woman to my right, who seemed friendly and looked to be about my age or perhaps in her 40s. I may have asked where we were going, but I don't remember getting a response. While we were driving, I remember looking up and to the left, out of the furthest corner of my eyes, to try and see the details of the alien man's face. His skin was a very pale blue. He had human-like eyes, very small indentations for ears, a smooth bump where a human nose would be, and was completely hairless. He wore clothing, but during my brief glance, I didn't really pay attention to that. I was too busy analyzing his skin and his facial features. His body was humanoid, not stunted like Zeta's, but proportionally much more like a human. We drove out to the country, where we were surrounded by trees. No buildings or other houses nearby. I don't remember arriving or getting out of the car, but the next thing I knew, I was walking down a dirt road, which led to a large house, alongside the East Asian woman. I think the pale blue man was either ahead of us or behind us, but she was talking to me the whole time, so I was a bit distracted. The road leading to the house was long, and so was our conversation. And yet, I don't remember a single word about what was discussed. As we approached the house, I could see that there was a light on inside. We were walking very casually, like taking a stroll, not with purpose. Almost like we were catching up, but in a business sense, not like old friends. I don't remember entering the house, but I remember being inside and seeing her living room. It was as normal and mundane as any house of our era. She took a picture off of her desk. It had to have been something like an 8 by 10, not in a frame, and she was holding it in the landscape position, and the image was of a girl of about 8 or 9 years old. It was an East Asian-looking girl with braces, smiling, but a candid shot, almost as though this image had been taken from far away with some sort of telescopic lens. It was just she and I in the room, and she asked me if I recognized the girl. I said, "No, but she's beautiful." I was under the impression this was her daughter, so I wanted to say something nice. It was like she was testing me or something, but not in the way that some determined detective might question someone. More like she was just curious to see if I recognized her. Shortly after, we walked over to a dinner table of sorts, and there were about 6 of us. I didn't really count, but that's a guess based on my vague memory of it. I sat at one of the ends of the table, and an old man approached, walking in from another room, and sat down to my left. It was Vanessa's grandfather, Bob. I was very surprised to see him, and I immediately asked him, "Have you ever seen me here before in your other experiences like this?" I think he said no. Neither of us were particularly happy to see each other because we were in such a disoriented state. I was relieved to see him, but also completely confused as to why he was there. I got the feeling this was not the first time he'd had an experience like this. At some point, I asked my female liaison her name, and she told me it was Money. I asked her, "Money?" And she said, "Yes, Money." This was bizarre to me, but I made a mental note to remember that. Once we dispensed with the pleasantries, we were ushered into another room, which looked like an entirely different building altogether. I don't actually remember this very clearly. I just remember sort of going unconscious and then waking back up in another room, which seems to happen often during these experiences. I was standing in front of some sort of apparatus which looked like I was on a treadmill, but there was no moving walkway part, just the handles and a screen in front of me. We were all naked, and there was about 5 of us in the room, each standing in front of these machines. Whatever it was that they were doing to us, I went first, but I lost consciousness during the procedure. When I regained consciousness, I woke up in a large bed with white sheets and white blankets, in a large bedroom with minimal decorative elements. It was very dimly lit, but I could see well enough to make out the dimensions of the room. It was essentially a rectangular-shaped room, with the bed positioned in the middle of one of the longer walls, and a door to the right, on the same wall as the headboard. There may have also been some sort of 2-way mirror on the left wall, but I don't remember exactly. What sticks out in my mind is the feeling that I was being observed. I was drugged somehow. I had the feeling that one might experience when coming out of surgery. When I got out of the bed and opened the door to get some context on where I had just woken up, I found myself in a strange room which resembled what I can only describe as an airport casino, but the machines with the games on them were not for gambling. They were for some other purpose that I didn't understand, almost like arcade games or interactive IQ tests, but with a modern casino machine type interface, very colorful with lots of moving graphics. There were human beings all throughout this room, all of them male. Some of them interacting with each other, some of them playing on the machines. But I wasn't doing either. I was walking around confused, and I think I was either completely nude or in my underwear, and I was sort of exploring the place in this inebriated state, with no regard for my state of undress. There was a dark red carpet covering the entire floor, no windows to the outside, and there were little openings in the wall, much like tellers at the bank. You couldn't see the tellers or whomever was on the other side. It was just a wall with a slit in it for exchanging God knows what. Maybe they were deposit slots for our genetic material, or some large port for uploading data? I have no idea. It was set up with at least 4 or more of these stations, indicating that sometimes it gets busy and is necessary for people to form a line. But there were no lines or anyone using these slots at the time, so I could only speculate. So the teller stations were at one end of the room, near the door to the bedroom I'd been sleeping in, and the casino-like machines were in the center of the room, along the wall. At the opposite end of the room, there was an opening to another room, where the treadmill-like machines were, and I looked into the room and saw what is now a fuzzy memory of a being or a man operating the machines. The thing that stuck out to me the most was that I was watching these people undergo the procedure I had just gone through. There were these levitating devices about the size of a baseball, with needles and long metallic things protruding out of them, and they were hovering near the genitals, particularly the testicles. I surmised that they were either giving them injections or perhaps extracting genetic material, maybe both. I remember being aware that I was under constant surveillance, and that any time I spoke, someone could hear me. So after witnessing this, I said out loud, "Thank you for letting me see this." For some reason, I assumed they were not going to blank my memory, and that they were allowing me to see what had been done to me and the others. I don't remember seeing Bob again while I was there, but he may have gotten the procedure while I had mine, and perhaps he was asleep in a similar room to the one I'd woken up in. Afterwards, I wandered around the rooms analyzing the details of various things. There was one thing in particular that was deeply confusing and morally questionable. I saw a platform only a couple inches off the floor, in which there was a human-sized rotating platform with different sections, like the shape of pie slices as tall as a refrigerator. Inside each section of the pie was a human woman, completely still and immobile. One woman in particular caught my eye because she was extraordinarily attractive and dressed in a rather revealing way. She wasn't moving even though her eyes were open. She appeared to be looking down at a smartphone-type device that she held in her hand. She wasn't even blinking, and I couldn't determine whether she was a real person in some kind of stasis or a lifelike android who was indistinguishable from a real person. There wasn't any liquid inside of the chamber, and she didn't look dusted with ice like someone in a cryogenic state. She was just frozen in time. I wanted to approach her for a closer look, but I was afraid she'd suddenly wake up and notice me. She was intimidatingly beautiful and so lifelike that even though I wasn't sure she was real, I was just as nervous to approach her as I would be in any other circumstance. And she was basically in her underwear. It didn't feel right to just stand there and look at her. What were the implications of these chambers? It wasn't too difficult to look around the room and put 2 and 2 together, realizing that everyone undergoing the procedure was male, and everyone inside these chambers was female. It had to be some kind of breeding program. If these were real women, it's horrifying to imagine that perhaps the reason they were being stored like this was potentially due to them having been suddenly frozen and abducted right off the street or inside their homes and placed inside one of these tubes. In this drugged-up state, it didn't even occur to me that these women might be here against their will. What would they think if they were conscious enough to know what was being done to them? It didn't occur to me that they might need my help. Clearly, I wasn't entirely myself. I couldn't feel fear. Is it possible I couldn't feel empathy either? At some point during my exploration, the woman named Money came out and found me. I was telling her how stunned I was at how real this experience was. I remember telling her, "This is the closest to being fully awake that I've felt in any of the previous experiences. It's unbelievable. I'm really here." And she was smiling and looked very pleased. She might have even said, "Yes," in excitement. For some reason, I had this feeling of familiarity with her, and kind of assumed that she knew about the other experiences. Not only that, but I was speaking to her as if this whole thing was some sort of project that I had volunteered for, and I was reporting to her about how it was going, as though she was the project manager or something. But I don't recall ever seeing her before or signing up for anything. After this occurred, I felt a jolt, which immediately transported me back to my bedroom, but I wasn't fully awake yet. I was still in the astral, or perhaps an alternate dimension of my room, lying in bed, and all I could think about was how much I wanted to go back to where I'd been. So I did my best to sort of hold the feeling of being in that other realm, which consisted of resisting the pull to wake up, like fighting the urge to fall asleep, but in reverse. After a few minutes, I could feel the ringing coming on in my right ear. It intensified rapidly, and before I knew it, I was in a sort of disembodied state. No astral body either. Looking into a mirror or maybe a hologram that seemed to work like a three-dimensional mirror. But instead of seeing my human self reflected back at me, I saw an alien being with beige skin, friendly human-like eyes, but much larger, a very skinny neck, a nose like E.T., the Spielberg movie, a small mouth and smile lines on either side of the nose. This being had a kind and friendly energy, and I realized this being was me. I immediately thought, "That's what I look like?" And I was kind of disappointed because this was not necessarily an attractive person. This was a hairless E.T. looking guy, benevolent and loving, sure, but not handsome or heroic looking by human standards. Clearly, I was still experiencing much of this through the filter of my human ego. I guess I had always imagined that my alien self would have blue skin like the Andromedans or Arcturians, or that I'd be some intimidatingly handsome Pleiadian man with long flowing locks of blonde hair. How ridiculous is that? A quintessential example of the spiritual ego at work. On a deeper note, I've always felt a very strong connection to the blue-skinned Hindu avatars, Vishnu, Krishna, Rama, Buddha, etc., and I can recall the first time I saw depictions of them in a British museum as a boy. Even before I had any understanding of what a starseed or wanderer was, upon seeing these paintings, I felt like I was looking at some lost part of myself, and this was the first clue I had about what my ET origins might be. All of this is to say that after seeing this beige Zeta-looking version of myself, I felt disappointed, not just in the appearance, but at the possibility that my feelings back in that museum could have led me so astray for so many years. The image of my ET self faded away, and a new image appeared. I suddenly became aware that I was watching these projections inside of some sort of box in front of me. The box was about 3 foot by 3 foot, with gold metallic beams for the frame, and burgundy-colored fabric, like velvet curtains, all the way around like a small canopy. This new hologram was of a boy who appeared inside the box, completely lifelike, but it wasn't his whole body. The image faded at about the chest line. The boy was about 7 years old, with long, dark brown hair just below the jawline, and light brown skin. He looked as if he could have been half Asian. He reminded me of my nephew Max, who is of a similar complexion, but it wasn't him. The boy was saying something like, "I died, but it's okay, I will live again." and that made me so sad and somewhat horrified. After the projection of the boy faded away, I abruptly woke up, sober and clear, wide awake like all the other times. Upon reflecting on what I had just experienced, I began thinking, could that little boy have been one of my past lives? Or could he be my future son? Even more horrifying to think about. He certainly looked like a kid that could be a cross between me and Vanessa, but it could also not be that, too. And as I'm writing this, I wonder if maybe Money was actually the little girl she showed me in the photo. Maybe she was asking me if I remembered her. Was the little boy her brother who died? And perhaps she thinks I'm the reincarnation of him? She wanted to see if I remembered her. I wouldn't remember the grown-up version of her because I would have been gone, but I might remember how she looked when I was alive. Alas, intuitive speculation is all I have in understanding why I'm being shown these things. I can only hope that someday some of it makes sense. So, upon further reflection on what's happening to me with these experiences at large, I've concluded that they seem to be trying to tune me into their dimension, or an in-between place where we can meet, whereby they are attempting to either test me and or improve my lucidity and ability to remain there longer, so that I can recall more and exist in and or travel between both places, perhaps to build a bridge between our dimension or universe and theirs. This is a kind of contact unlike anything I've seen in movies or read in books, almost like a sort of three-dimensional, five-sensory form of channeling that takes place in a virtual environment, rather than only coming through as a voice. This allows them to show me more, rather than having to filter everything through the English language. Then, of course, there's the other aspect to all of this that has to do with potentially showing me my past lives. Are they trying to tell me that reincarnation is a real thing? I've always believed that it was, but now I'm seeing real things that I may have actually lived before. Afterthoughts. Looking back at the time this occurred and when I woke up, it absolutely blows my mind that this was all experienced within the span of about an hour and a half, which only solidifies for me that time works very differently in the places they bring me to than it does in our waking reality. So far, they have shown me that we are multidimensional beings having lived past and future lives on various planets in various universes. And while our focus currently resides in a singular incarnation in three-dimensional physicality, the realms we consider to be beyond life, whether that be death or other dimensions, are closer and more accessible than we know. They have shown me that consciousness not only travels outside the physical body, whether one is considered living or dead, but that it can experience multiple locations, timelines, and realities simultaneously. They have also shown me that there is some kind of human breeding program that I'm involved in, willingly, despite the moral objections that my human ego is feeling rather strongly right now. It is troubling to think that there are sides of myself that are hidden from me that I may not agree with. I seem to have been in complete support of Money and her program. While I was there, in whatever state they put me in, I found the whole thing fascinating rather than troubling. It wasn't only about the breeding program, however. It was also about the lucidity in these other dimensions. She was using me to test the quality of my awareness in this other place. What had the procedure really done to me? Were they using us to create other bodies, other vessels, for consciousness to be transferred into? I didn't see any babies. I hesitate to even speculate further about the more malevolent implications this may all have, and I'm struggling to put it all together. Reincarnation, human reproduction, aliens, and other dimensions. Why are they showing this to me? After working with ChatGPT to create the images you see throughout the story, I had the thought to ask it about Money's name. I thought, is there any way that I misheard her, and that perhaps her name was a legitimate name in Asia and only sounds like money to me? To my complete and utter astoundment, ChatGPT informed me that in Mandarin, a very common name for a woman is money or mungni. And I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but that's my best attempt. This name contains the Mandarin characters for the word dream and the word grace or girl. The name Money literally means dream girl or dream beauty, according to other sources I've found. So when I asked her what her name was, it was as if she was saying, just call me Dream Girl. I lived in Hong Kong during my later high school years, but I don't speak a word of Chinese. Mandarin isn't even the predominant dialect there, so I couldn't have even subconsciously known any of this or overheard it anywhere. What are the odds? As usual, there's a lot to unpack here. The version of me who went out Huxley's proverbial door in the wall certainly isn't the same as the version of me who came back through.